You think this is just another ghost story where evil meets its end? Wrong. This is a 10-year-long, meticulously planned hunt. The hunter is a boar, and the prey a mighty king. You were once the strongest warrior in Qi. When the king ordered you to assassinate the ruler of Lu, he promised, "Do this, and I'll make you a noble." But after you twisted the Marquis of Lu's neck, you were bound and taken to the execution ground. As your head fell, you cursed, "My bones will turn into a boar and devour your heart and liver." Years later, during a royal hunt, the new king encountered a massive boar. His attendants cried out, "It's Peng Sheng!" Before you drove your tusks through his throat, you heard his desperate cry, "I regret it." Clamping his blood-stained red boots in your jaws, you headed toward the place where your bones were buried. The carriage wheels rolled over the tamped earthen road of Lindsay, capital of Qi, with a muffled sound like distant thunder. You sat on the secondary carriage beside Duke Xiang of Qi, your muscles bulging like stone beneath the heavy armor, each jolt making the lines of your back strain under the leather plates. Wind swept up dust, and the faint aroma of wine and meat from deep within the palace grounds, stinging your nose. From the royal carriage ahead came Duke Xiang's flirtatious laughter with his sister, Lady Wen Jiang, the newly widowed lady of Lu, hissing like a serpent's tongue, slithering into your ears, sparking an icy, itchy discomfort. "Your name is Peng Sheng, the mightiest warrior of Qi. Your arms can draw a 3-stone bow. Your fists can kill a charging bull. Your strength was once your glory, the ladder that let you climb out of the mud. Yet now, that very strength weighs heavy on your chest, like a slab of cold iron. Just last night, during that secret meeting thick with wine and conspiracy, Duke Xiang's eyes, burning red from power and lust, locked onto you. 'Peng Sheng,' he said, his voice dripping with temptation and authority. His fingers struck the table with a sharp clang of gold and jade. 'The Marquis of Lu blocks my path and offends Wenjiang's eyes. End him for me, and I'll make you a noble. On Qi's council, there will be a seat for you, wealth and honor for generations to come.' That promise was like poison wrapped in honey, scorching your throat. A noble title. For a man of such humble birth like you, it was a peak beyond reach. You saw the feverish ambition in Duke Xiang's eyes, saw Wenjiang's pleading gaze, tinged with unspoken pressure. In an instant, whatever faint respect you had for the Marquis of Lu was crushed beneath this overwhelming temptation. You bowed your head heavily, your calloused hand pressing against the cold bronze hilt of your sword, your knuckles whitening from the grip. A low, thunderous voice rumbled from your chest. "Your servant obeys." The chants came during the chaos of the return journey. The narrow road was rough and jolting. When the carriage of the Marquis of Lu tilted sharply after hitting a stone, you lunged like a caged tiger breaking free, letting out a low roar as you attacked. Power surged and roared through your veins. Your massive hand shot out like lightning, clamping down on the Marquis's neck. It was as fragile as a snapped reed in your grip. Time seemed to freeze. You saw the sudden shock and boundless fear explode in his eyes. That fear was like icy water, dousing the flames of ambition in your heart, leaving behind a sharp, stabbing ache. Crack! The sickening snap cut through the noise of the wheels. The Marquis's head twisted at an unnatural angle, the light in his eyes extinguished, leaving only hollow death. His body slumped limply onto the ornate cushions, like a bag with all its bones sucked out. The pungent stench of blood exploded in the air, mixing with leather, dust, and death. It almost choked you. You let go, feeling the lingering warmth and stickiness in your palm as an icy chill shot up your spine, plunging you into a frozen abyss. Outside, the guards of Lu let out a blood-curdling scream. "My lord!" A tidal wave of slaughter surged down the narrow road. The Lu guards, eyes red like mad beasts, swung their weapons furiously at cheese carriages. The clash of steel, dying screams, and terrified horse cries tore apart the calm of dawn. Amid the chaos, you glimpsed the royal curtain lift, revealing Duke Xiang's twisted face. But in his eyes, you saw no anger, only a flash of cold relief, almost ease. That tiny realization stabbed into your heart like a poisoned needle. When the chaos finally subsided, the Qi camp was drowned in suffocating silence and the thick stench of blood. 2 armored soldiers escorted you toward Duke Xiang's grand tent, lit bright and heavily guarded. As the flap opened, the warmth of burning charcoal mixed with incense hit you. Duke Xiang sat high on his throne, his face grave and mournful. Lady Wenjiang sat below, head lowered, her shoulders trembling with muffled sobs but hidden beneath her wide sleeves. You could not see her true expression. Inside, Qi's top ministers stood in a line, their eyes sharp as blades, all fixed on you. "Traitor Peng Sheng." Duke Xiang suddenly slammed the table, his voice booming like thunder, shaking the candles. His feigned grief almost spilled over. "The Marquis of Lu was my kin, and you dared to commit this treacherous act of regicide. Your madness defies heaven and man. Guards!" His voice rose, hard and merciless. "Seize this fiend! Behead him and display his head to honor the Marquis's spirit and calm Lu's fury." No chance to speak, no hesitation. Cold bronze chains wrapped around your wrists and ankles, their biting chill freezing your blood. You jerked your head up, your bloodshot eyes glaring at Duke Xiang's righteous mask. The crushing betrayal roared over you like a tidal wave, swallowing you whole. A noble's title, wealth, and honor, it was all a carefully woven lie. You were nothing but a disposable blade, a filthy tool to be discarded at will. That brutal truth smothered you more than the chains around your neck. Rage burned in your chest, threatening to incinerate your sanity. You were like a cornered beast, muscles taut, chains rattling as you struggled, a low, guttural growl rumbling from your throat. "Jiang Zuer, you lied to me. May you die a wretched death. Take him away." Duke Xiang's sharp voice cut off your howl, tinged with a faint trace of panic. He flung his hand, as if brushing off something filthy. Iron fists and spear shafts rained down on your back and legs, pain driving you to your knees. You were dragged, roughly, your boots scraping across the coarse ground with a harsh squeal, growing ever distant from that warm, power-soaked tent. Behind you, Wenjiang's muffled sobs, real or fake, and Duke Xiang's false, self-righteous accusations sounded like mocking voices from another world, slicing into your ears and nerves. The warm glow of the campfires twisted and wavered in your eyes before being devoured by the icy darkness. The execution ground of Qi lay on a desolate riverbank outside Lindsay. The late autumn wind, like knives wrapped in ice shards, howled over the bare riverbed and the sparse, withered grass, whipping up clouds of yellow dust. They stripped you of your armor, leaving only a thin prisoner's robe, the rough hemp scraped against your wounds, burning with pain. Cold iron chains bit deep into your flesh, while the heavy wooden cane crushed your breath. Forced to kneel on the cold, stony ground, the coarse gravel dug into your knees as the chill crawled up your bones. A dark mass of people surrounded you, silent and numb, their gazes stabbed into your back like countless needles. On the high platform, the execution officer's voice, cold and brittle, shattered in the wind. The regicidal traitor Peng Sheng, guilty beyond pardon. Behead him and display his head to the crowd. Every word was like a dull blade, slicing your already numb heart over and over again. You struggled to lift your head, staring at the gray sky. No gods looked down in mercy, only a low ceiling of leaden clouds pressing down, heavy enough to crush hope. Glory of strength, the dream of nobility, all of it shattered into dust here, on the freezing execution ground, scattered by the wind. The executioner approached, hefting the heavy demon-headed blade. The stench of sweat and blood hit your face. The blade flashed in the light, blinding your eyes for an instant. As the icy edge touched the back of your neck, a violent surge of power erupted from the depths of your bones, mingled with endless hatred and defiance, breaking through every shackle of fear and despair. You were no longer a discarded tool, no longer a lowly brute. You were Peng Sheng, the man who once held another's life in his hands, yet was betrayed by those he trusted most. All the humiliation, fury, and unwillingness exploded like a volcano that had been dormant for millennia. Summoning every ounce of your remaining strength, you threw back your head and howled at the sky. That sound was no longer human, it was the wail of a vengeful spirit crawling out of the depths of hell, shrill and soul-piercing, drowning out the whistling wind and plunging the execution ground into deathly silence. Every word carried a torrent of venomous hatred and a blood-soaked curse, striking like poisoned thunder at the traitor far away in the palace. Jiang Zhuer. Let my bones turn into a boar to tear your heart and liver. Let my bones turn into a boar to tear your heart and liver. Before the last word had even faded, the cold, heavy blade had already fallen with finality. Darkness, eternal, icy darkness swallowed everything in an instant. Yet that searing hatred, that soul-burning defiance, that final curse uttered with your dying breath did not fade. They clung like stubborn vines, winding around the headless corpse, coiling around the rolling, dust-stained head with its eyes frozen wide in fury. They rooted deep into the blood-soaked mud of the riverbank. Hatred became your only anchor of existence, silently fermenting in this forgotten wasteland, waiting. Time flowed by like the cold river, carrying away the dust and noise of the world. 10 years passed, long enough for the glazed tiles of Lindsay's palaces to shine once more, long enough for gossip about Peng Sheng's regicide to be replaced by newer tales in the streets. Duke Xiang of Qi, Jiang Zhuer, had long since recovered from his initial panic. He drowned himself in wine, hunting, and the tender arms of Wen Jiang. He numbed himself with a life of intoxication, locking away the bloody curse from that riverbank and those furious, unblinking eyes into the darkest corners of his memory. On quiet palace nights, when nightmares startled him awake, his heavy robes soaked with cold sweat, and that shrill curse still echoed in his ears, he would gulp down more liquor in frustration, drowning both fear and reason. He believed that time was the best sediment, enough to bury all sordid memories. In late autumn at Beiqiu, the mountains and forests burned with deep reds and golds. On a whim, Duke Xiang, accompanied by a large retinue, rode in his grand carriage to this once familiar hunting ground. Horns blared, flags snapped in the wind, hooves shattered the dead leaves, startling countless birds and beasts. Duke Sheng, brimming with vigor, personally mounted his horse and drew his bow, chasing a powerful elk. He savored the thrill of exerting his strength, the intoxicating control as prey fell beneath his arrows. It was as if only through this could he temporarily dispel the shadows lingering in his heart. The chase lasted half a day. The sun tilted westward, stretching the forest shadows long and thin. The cunning elk finally disappeared into the dense woods. Duke Xiang reined in his panting stallion, sweat soaking his luxurious hunting clothes. Looking around, he saw his guards had scattered, busy gathering the day's kill, their noisy voices fading. Then, without warning, an unnatural stillness descended. The wind stopped. The chirping of insects and birds vanished. Even the shouts of the guards in the distance seemed sealed off by an invisible barrier. Only a heavy, spine-chilling sound of breathing came from deep within the thick, shadowy underbrush ahead. Huff, huff. The sound was coarse, sticky, carrying an inhuman, terrifying primal force. Each breath thudded against Duke Xiang's heart like the pounding of a drum. A sudden, icy chill shot from his tailbone to the crown of his head, freezing every bone in his body. His hands trembled uncontrollably on the reins. His horse snorted and pawed the ground nervously, its eyes wide with instinctive fear. What is that?" Duke Xiang's voice cracked and rasped, laced with a tremor he himself did not notice, as he turned to the few attendants still nearby. The guards, too, had sensed the eerie stillness and that dreadful breathing. Their faces turned pale, hands gripping their sword hilts tightly, their eyes locked on the shadowy thicket, as tense as a bowstring drawn to its limit. Crash! With an unstoppable force, the thicket split apart. The sound of breaking branches shrieked in their ears. A colossal beast emerged before them. It was as massive as a moving hill, its body covered with bristling, black, steel-like hair that gleamed with an ominous sheen in the fading sunset. Two curved, scythe-like tusks jutted from its jaws, their tips glinting with deadly light. Most terrifying of all was its stance. It did not crawl on all fours, but stood upright like a man, its powerful hind legs supporting a mountain-like body, while its forelimbs, as thick as beams, hung in the air. Those eyes, and the huge, murky eyeballs, burned two flames beyond description. They were not the savage fury of a beast, but a storm of hatred, a rage born of betrayal, and a cold, mocking contempt undeniably human. It stood there, less than 10 paces from Duke Xiang's carriage, its massive shadow swallowing him and his attendants. Those eyes, blazing with the fires of hell, locked onto Duke Xiang's face, which had turned completely bloodless in an instant. Time seemed to freeze. Fear poured into Duke Xiang's veins like icy water, freezing his blood and breath. He thought of that riverbank, the headless corpse, the furious, unblinking head, and above all, that soul-piercing curse. "Let my bones turn into a boar, to tear your heart and liver." That voice, echoing across 10 long years, now found its most terrifying, direct answer in this towering, man-like beast. Peng Peng Sheng, an old guard who had once witnessed that execution, felt his soul shatter. Pointing at the monstrous boar, he let out a shrill, broken scream. "It's Peng Sheng! Lord Peng Sheng has come back for vengeance!" That cry, like a spark dropped into boiling oil, instantly ignited everyone's deepest, most suppressed terror. "Peng Sheng! It's Peng Sheng's ghost. The vengeful spirit is here." The guards panicked, forgetting all duty. Screaming in terror, they abandoned their armor and weapons, scattering like startled ants, scrambling and crawling to flee. The horses, too, went mad, rearing with wild neighs, throwing their riders to the ground and bolting into the depths of the woods. Duke Xiang's charioteer had already collapsed in fear, dropping the reins. The carriage horse, terrified by the screams and the monstrous presence, went completely insane. It let out a high-pitched scream, its forelegs rising as the entire carriage tilted violently. Duke Shang, still shaken by the shout of Peng Sheng, was thrown off the seat before he could react. Ah! His terrified cry was drowned by the neighing of the horse and the deafening crash of the overturned carriage. The world spun wildly as his body, like a kite with its string cut, slammed onto the cold, hard ground strewn with stones and dead leaves. A searing pain shot through his left leg, the crack of shattering bone unmistakable. He struggled to crawl, but the agony left him immobile. Worse still, those hellfire-burning eyes were now right before him. The towering boar growled low in its throat, the sound rumbling like distant thunder as it stepped closer. Each step made the earth tremble. Its colossal form blocked the last rays of the setting sun, and the shadow of death completely engulfed Duke Shang. The stench of blood and rot was so overpowering it nearly suffocated him. Those enormous, murky eyes, seething with boundless hatred, pinned him in place. A massive hoof, slick with mud and slime, came down with crushing force on his shattered left leg. Crack! The sound of his bones splintering was so sharp it set teeth on edge. Ah! Duke Xiang's scream no longer sounded human. The pain turned his vision black, nearly knocking him unconscious. He could feel the jagged shards of bone stabbing through his flesh. The giant boar lowered its head, opening its tusked jaws. The stinking hot breath washed over Duke Xiang's pale, twisted face. It seemed to sniff carefully, and in its murky eyes flickered a chilling glint of recognition. Then the low growl in its throat erupted into a furious roar, filled with unending hatred. The roar was deafening, as if tearing at Duke Shang's eardrums. The beast raised one massive forehoof, no longer merely pressing down but swinging it like a giant hammer straight at his chest. No! The shadow of death swallowed him completely. In the grip of ultimate terror and pain, Duke Shang let out a desperate wail, choked with endless regret. Peng Sheng, I repent. I repent. This confession, 10 years too late, was like ice dropped into boiling water, igniting the boar's final, most violent fury. The giant hoof did not falter, crashing down with the force of thunder and crumbling mountains. Crunch! A sickening, hollow crack rang out as Duke Xiang's chest visibly caved in. His luxurious robes were instantly drenched in dark red. His body convulsed violently, his eyes bulging in disbelief as he stared at the burning eyes of the boar. A rasping wheeze, like a broken bellows, escaped his throat as black blood mixed with fragments of his organs gushed from his mouth and nose. The boar's tusks, white, caked with dirt and blood slowly, with a cruel, ritual-like precision, pierced Duke Shang's faintly rising neck. The scalding blood, still carrying the last warmth of life, spurted out, splattering across the boar's dark bristles and tusks, and onto Duke Shang's own face, now twisted in pure agony and terror. Those eyes, once full of ambition and cunning, now were nothing but hollow pits of frozen horror, staring lifelessly at the sky above Beichu's forest, stained crimson by the sunset. The boar, or rather, the incarnation of Peng Sheng's decade of hatred and obsession, slowly raised its head. Thick blood dripped from its tusks, blooming into dark red flowers on the leaf-strewn ground. In its murky eyes, the raging flames of hatred flickered slightly as its enemy took his last breath. Yet they did not go out. It slowly turned its massive head, its gaze sweeping across the hunting ground where it had once roamed as a man, and where its bones and rage now lay buried. Then its eyes fell on Duke Xiang's right shoe, a finely crafted red ceremonial boot, once the symbol of a marquis's supreme power. In the chaos and trampling, it had been flung aside, lying alone among the blood-stained leaves. That vivid crimson stood out against the gray earth and blood like a glaring mockery. The boar let out a low growl, part lament, part savage triumph. Lowering its huge head, it carefully but firmly hooked the blood-soaked red boot with its tusks. The cold, metal tip of the shoe struck against the tusk with a faint clink. With the blood-stained boot clamped in its jaws, a symbol of the Marquis's once absolute power, now soaked in the traitor's blood, it no longer spared a glance at the broken body lying behind. Step by heavy step, it turned and walked toward the outskirts of Lindsay, toward that cold, desolate riverbank where Peng Sheng's head and all his humiliation were buried. The sunset stretched its massive, lonely shadow long across the blood-soaked earth, like a silent road leading to the underworld. Each step it took seemed to pound a question into the silent land, questioning the merciless, cruel will of heaven itself. Heavy footsteps crushed the gravel at the edge of Bayqu's hunting grounds and stepped onto the familiar, dried riverbed outside Lindsay. 10 years of time had eroded the land, yet the outline of the riverbank was still faintly discernible, now even more desolate. The icy autumn wind carried sand and grit, lashing against the boar's thick, blood-caked, mud-streaked bristles with a rustling sound. The blood-soaked red boot clamped in its mouth, swayed slightly in the dim dusk like a crimson banner. Deeper into the riverbank lay a sunken hollow, half covered with wild grass and thorns that was the end. Years ago, Peng Sheng's headless body had been hastily buried there. Not even a stone to mark the grave. Hatred was the only tombstone. The giant boar stopped before the hollow, its murky eyes lowered, staring at the ground that had swallowed its flesh and blood. There was no sorrow, no release, only a bone-deep exhaustion forged by 10 years of rage. Slowly, with immense effort, it bent its powerful hind legs. That colossal, inhuman body sank into a posture almost reverent, kneeling heavily, its forehead pressing against the cold, rough gravel. The red boot, gripped tightly in its jaws, fell onto the dirt before it, lying there like a giant frozen tear of blood. At the very instant it knelt, a sudden change erupted. The hill-like body, the steel needle bristles, the fearsome tusks, every feature of the beast began to dissolve and collapse at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as if an invisible hand were erasing it. Thick, black vapor surged from every pore, boiling and writhing, carrying a bone-piercing, chill and mournful wails like unbound, vengeful spirits. The black mist spread swiftly, engulfing the entire hollow, cutting off the last lingering rays of the setting sun. Within the black haze, shapes and shadows twisted violently, contorting, stretching, and writhing in agony. Finally, like the receding tide, all the strange phenomena contracted and condensed before vanishing. When the black mist cleared from the hollow, nothing remained. Only a red boot, smeared with mud and dark blood, lay forlorn on the cold sand. Beside it was a small mound of earth, darker than normal, as if stained repeatedly by some unseen force, rising slightly like an unmarked, forgotten grave. The wind howled over the empty riverbank, lifting a few brittle yellow leaves that spun in the air before falling upon the small mound and the blood-stained boot. Other than that, there was no sound. Every trace of Peng Sheng, his flesh, and the incarnation of his decade-long hatred had completely dissolved into the heavens and earth. All that remained was the red boot, symbol of betrayal and final reckoning, and the patch of dark earth deep within the riverbank, silently bearing witness to endless grief and resentment. The cycle of cause and effect was fulfilled, and his obsession had finally faded.